please. Lovely. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for this very special event that we're hosting on rural affordable housing. For anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Alison Brown. I'm Head of Business Services at Cambridgeshire ACRE, and my job this afternoon is to try and keep this all to time and to ensure you get your afternoon back at 3:30. So bear with me and I'll do my best. So you may or may not know that this week is Rural Housing Week. And that's when all the organisations across the country who are involved in the delivery of rural housing get together, and we try and shine a spotlight on why affordable housing is so important in rural communities. So this afternoon, we've got a good array of speakers to listen to this afternoon. So first off, you're going to hear from Jenna Brame, who's our rural and community-led housing enabler at Cambridgeshire ACRE. And then after that, two of our partners in our Rural Affordable Housing Partnership are going to speak about their involvement in delivering affordable housing. And then hopefully at the end, we'll have a bit of time for a Q&A where you can ask all our panellists any questions you've got about housing. So what I would ask you to do is, if you don't mind, if you've got any questions while people are speaking, do you just want to pop them in the chat, just to, so we don't lose track of them. And then at the end, when we do the Q&A, I'll invite you to come on screen and invite and ask your questions. I think that probably keeps things flowing as well as it can. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jenna.
Sorry about that, I got my buttons all mixed up. Right, let me just share my screen. Let's make sure. If I can figure out that one. There we go. So you should now be able to see my presentation on your screen.
We can, thank you.
Good. So yeah, hi, as Alison said, I'm Jenna Brame, Rural and Community-led Housing Enabler at Cambridgeshire ACRE. It's really great to see so many of you joining us on Rural Housing Week. I'm on screen to talk. There we go. So what I'm going to talk about for the next about 10 minutes or so is just to do a very brief whistle-stop tour of rural affordable housing for you all. I know some of you might be familiar with it, but equally some of you won't. So just to give you that quick overview of what rural housing is. I'm also going to cover why it's important, how it benefits the community, and why we require rural exception site policy within planning policy to support the development of rural affordable housing. I'm also going to cover how Cambridgeshire ACRE can help with bringing forward rural affordable housing and what we can do to support parish councils and communities to access that housing in their villages. So just to start off, the best place to start is by explaining the most common affordable housing products to you. So these are a mixture of kind of rental tenures and home ownership tenures. So at the basic level, affordable housing is defined as housing for those that are unable to meet their needs on the open market. And a really important thing to note is in rural areas, these homes must remain affordable for local people in perpetuity. So what does affordable housing look like? So affordable rent is one you probably see an awful lot pop up, especially over recent years. So this is the rent that's 80% or less the market rates. This is kind of a cap on what housing associations can charge to tenants. It can be set lower than this 80%, but this 80% is the cap, and that's kind of the level you'd expect to be seeing affordable rent at. There's also another type of rent called social rent. We haven't seen this as much over recent years, but it's something that is starting to kind of start cropping up. A bit more encouragement from the government to kind of use this, and Homes England as well, who obviously do a lot of the help delivery of affordable housing. So very basically, it's based on a formula that takes into consideration property size, local house prices, and incomes. That is, in some of the data is based on county-wide data, just to give you an impression of how that might pan out. And they tend to be slightly less than affordable rents, but again, as I mentioned earlier, these haven't been used as much recently, but it is a type of rent that can be used for affordable homes. So on the other end of the scale, as a home ownership project, as a product, have shared ownership. So it's an option for those that want to get on the housing ladder, but can't necessarily afford a mortgage on an open market property. So how it works is people can part rent and part own their property. It's typically with a mortgage, but can also be if they've got savings to purchase that. But obviously a mortgage is the most common way we see that come forward. So a person can own 10 to 75% of their home's value. Typically, on average, it's between 25 and 75%. The 10% level is something that's quite new and is still kind of filtering in. It tends to be at the 25% level that people enter at. So as I said, people buy a share of their home and have to put at least a 5% deposit. That's a 5% deposit of the share of the home they buy, not of the whole property price. That's part of the aspect that makes it affordable. As people go on, they can own more of that in a process called staircasing, so they can own more of the home and therefore they pay less rent as they own more of their own home. There are some other tenures for affordable housing, but these are the most common ones that we see on a rural exception site at the moment. So what is a rural exception site, you might be asking? So a rural exception site is a site that has its own kind of unique characteristics, and they're defined in the National Planning Policy Framework, which sets out the government's planning policies for England. In Cambridgeshire, all our local authorities also have a rural exception site policy within their local plan, emphasising further how this should be implemented in your county or in your district. So these sites must be outside the development boundary for the policy to apply. They're sites that are not normally used for housing, hence being an exception to the normal planning policy to kind of address a proven need. So as they must meet a proven local need, which is a demonstration of the need for affordable housing in a community. The way this is normally done is through a housing needs survey. In Cambridgeshire, we do provide this service through our My Enabling role and our partnership. So the process typically is sending a survey to all people in the village, encouraging them to complete it if they need affordable housing. Also encouraging anyone that might have had to move out of the village but does have that local connection, either through family or work, that may want to return to the village if affordable housing was available to them. So as I said, I've kind of explained the local connection a bit there. So it's kind of summing it up again. It's anyone that might have lived in the village for a number of years, had to move away and would like to return, maybe working in the area or have family connections and need to move back into the area but have previously been unable to afford the housing. So another thing to mention is these schemes are only for affordable housing. The only time this might not be the case is a very, very small number of market homes are allowed on a scheme to make the scheme viable. This is not for a developer to make a profit on the scheme. I think it's the most important thing to note. It is purely to fund a gap between grant and funding that is available to housing associations to develop housing and what the scheme would actually cost. The priority will always be to deliver affordable housing. As I've already mentioned, affordable homes are required to stay affordable in perpetuity. Means they can't be sold into the open market and must remain, so future generations can also afford and access affordable housing. In terms of shared ownership, which I've just mentioned, this does mean people cannot staircase to 100% of the property. So that property remains in circulation, but does still give those people opportunity to build up the finances and the equity to afford another home in the future. And the final thing to mention is these schemes should be appropriate in size, scale and design to the community they're being built in. So it means they shouldn't overwhelm the services of the community they're being built into, and also fit in aesthetically with the area that they're being built in, so they're not an intrusion to the community. Example of this is Chalk Farm in Foxton, which is in South Cambridgeshire. It's developed and managed by South Cam themselves. A mixture of 1, 2 and 3 bedroom properties, so at the smaller end of the scale, which is appropriate for young families, young couples, and even older people that are looking to downsize into smaller properties. So there's quite a good mix of properties there that allow people to remain in the community. A great thing about this scheme as well is solar panels and air source heat pumps, which with the cost of living crisis we've experienced at the moment, avoiding things like using oil, as is quite common in rural communities, is a really valuable thing to be delivering. So why is this actually needed, you might be wondering. So average house prices are £44,000 higher in urban areas. These statistics are, I think these are last year's statistics, so things now obviously might be a little bit higher, but these are recent statistics from last year, but obviously we know how volatile everything has been in the last year. But still, it demonstrates there's quite a significant difference between house prices in urban and rural areas. Low-income households also require 8.3 times their salary to buy the cheapest homes in the community, which, as you can imagine, drives quite a lot of people out of their communities into surrounding areas where the housing is cheaper. Quite a lot less affordable housing is available in villages compared to urban areas as well. So we're looking really to ensure that people have homes that are suitable for their needs and can support healthy, resilient rural communities that are vibrant, can support families, businesses, jobs, and just keep those really strong communities in our rural areas, because we all know how vital they are to the survival of our rural communities. So at Cambridgeshire ACRE, what services do we offer to help support this? So we are there from the initial engagement, where you might, as a parish council or as a group, come to us wanting to know a bit more about affordable housing and initially inquiring about undertaking the housing needs survey process. Through that, we'll then undertake the process and put you in contact with our housing association partners who will sponsor the survey, and we'll conduct that survey and guide you through the whole process, explaining what the data means once we've collected it as well. If there is not a site already identified in the process as well, we'll support this you with this as well, whether that's doing site walks around the community, or even if you already have your own ideas of land and landowners that might be willing to engage in the process. We're still there to hold your hand through the end process, but this is much more heavy on the housing association and the local authority perspective in terms of designing the scheme, planning the scheme, getting planning permission, and then the homes being allocated for local people in your community as well. So parish council role is really vital in all of this, because you can promote and encourage people to engage and comment on the project, and also the housing needs survey, which is so vital to providing evidence that housing is needed in your community and making sure that that housing does develop to the right scale and is not something that is going to overwhelm and not actually meet the need of the residents in your community. Again, as I've just said, really valuable in identifying landowners who might be willing to engage in the process. That's often information that a housing association or myself or a local authority might not hold, and you have some credible connections that can help that be brought forward. You also help us understand the local context. Each rural community is unique, and all our housing association partners want to respect that and work with you in a really positive way to bring forward development. You can also encourage people with a housing need to register with the district council. We refer with rural etc. site to hidden need a lot. This is part of what the survey picks up, but also you can help encourage local people to get on the housing register and help support that need for development in your community. So in summary, rural exception sites are only for affordable housing, remain affordable, and are for local need. So truly benefiting your community. Housing needs surveys help capture this information to help us show who's in need and what type of housing is needed. Parish council is so vital in this whole process and really help us to do something that really is a valuable asset to their community. And ultimately, Cambridge ACRE is here to provide support to you through the whole process. And we're more than happy to work with you, answer questions, and just be a partner through the whole process with any community that is interested in rural affordable housing. So as I said, that was a very whistle-stop tour. So if you have any other questions that we don't answer later on, please feel free to contact me, and we'll share these details later on as well. And I hope that has answered some initial questions. But yeah, get in touch if you want to know more.
That's lovely. Thanks ever so much, Jenna. I think that's a really good insight into what rural affordable housing is, and the role that we can play, obviously, in helping bring rural exception sites forward. So I'm now going to move on, and I'm going to invite Michael Cramp from Hasto to join us on screen. Michael is the Regional Development Manager at Hasto, and he's going to talk about their commitment to affordable housing, how they deliver it, and also perhaps hopefully give us some examples of some sites they've delivered. Michael.
Thanks, Alison. I would say I'd love to join you on screen, but for some reason it doesn't pick up my video today. So I'll share screen, and hopefully that at least works. So perhaps you can just confirm whether you can see my screen now.
Not yet. It's just coming, Mike. I think we're there. Yeah, that's it now. Thank you.
Yeah, lovely, excellent. So yeah, following on from where Jenna's introduced, I'll be sort of discussing how housing associations pick up and start to develop schemes through that process in order to provide affordable homes at the end from the initial engagement work that Jenna and the team at Cambridgeshire ACRE have done. So I work for Hasto Group, and I'm the Regional Development Manager. A little bit about Hasto to start with. So we are a rural housing association. We own 7,500 homes, predominantly across south and east of England. And we look to build sustainable homes in sustainable communities, building homes to high environmental standards in excess of building regulations. We build predominantly in rural areas, plus a few market towns that serve surrounding rural areas. We're a member of the Rural Housing Alliance, and we work in partnership with the Rural Services Network and the National Housing Federation. And we're also an active member of the Cambridgeshire Rural Affordable Housing Partnership. So the key stages of development that I'm going to run through today, Jenna already touched on the identification of land, and we would then go through into a consultation period, then through into obtaining planning permission, tendering a scheme to contractors, obtaining funding, and then hopefully onto constructing the homes, and then finally the nice end result, the completion of the affordable homes. So the first bit about identifying land. So we would work closely with Cambridgeshire ACRE, the parish council and other stakeholders to identify suitable sites within the village. How we do that, we look at boundary inset maps, which are available from district councils, and we'll also walk the village to identify possible and suitable sites. We consider any key immediate issues that are identifiable. So if a particular piece of land has got existing uses, which might make it prohibitive for development, if we can see that there are services running through and across and above that piece of land that might be expensive to divert, or if there are particular access issues. So it might be a wonderful piece of land to develop, but there's no way of getting meaningful access to it. And those are all things that we would look at initially to discredit a site, or say that yes, it did have some potential mileage to look into further. We'd also then want to identify land ownership, and I think Jenna touched upon how we would look to use local knowledge in those instances. Where land isn't known who the ownership is of, then we can also see whether it's registered with the land registry and find out contact details that way as well. We would then move on to agreeing heads of terms with the preferred landowner. So this is where we would set out broadly the terms of the transaction for acquiring the land from them. And we'd also be obtaining an independent valuation of the land at that point. Housing associations use public money, so we have to make sure that we're using money wisely and obtaining best value. The land values that we pay for rural exception sites are typically above agricultural land value, but not as high as open market values. And the way that we look to secure a legal interest in a piece of land in order to take it through these next stages of consultation and planning is through an option agreement. And that enables us over a period of time to go away and do the due diligence that we want, seek the permissions that we need, and then confirm that we want to purchase it. In terms of consultation, we start by discussing initial proposals with the parish council and the landowner. We then move on to holding a public consultation event to invite views and explain how local people can become eligible for the properties. We also obtain local authority pre-application advice, which in some local authorities we're able to obtain free of charge, and in other local authorities we do have to pay. We'll also undertake necessary surveys and investigations required at this stage. So this could be things like ecology surveys, arboricultural surveys, site investigations, things that we will need both down the line when we come to tender the schemes of contractors, but also in order to obtain planning permission. At this point, we'd also be amending scheme designs based on feedback, and we'd be returning to the parish council to review the amended designs. And from the two images that you can see on the screen here, this is a scheme of Hastows, which is in Eltersley in Cambridge, South Cambridgeshire. And the image on the left is the initial concept design that was started with. And as you can see on the right, which is the scheme that eventually achieved planning permission, there are some changes that have occurred there. And that's as a result of consultation, various site investigations that have been undertaken. As you can see on the image on the right, there's an attenuation pond in the top left corner. So that's had to be factored into the scheme design. We then go on to planning. And once we've done our consultation and we're happy, the parish council is supportive still that we've got a scheme that will meet the need, we'd then be submitting a planning application along with relevant surveys that we've undertaken and any further supporting information that's required. At this point, there's a consultation period for statutory consultees and members of the public, which is normally at least 21 days. And at this point, if there's any feedback from the local authority, we'd be making any reasonable further amendments that are required before that scheme is looked to be determined. Planning determination would normally then be by either delegated authority or planning committee, the former being where it will be dealt with by officers, and the latter being where it will go to a committee of members. Once we've gone through by the planning committee or delegated authority, would be then looking to conclude a section 106 agreement. And this is the really important agreement for rural exception sites, because it's this agreement that will include the local lettings policies for allocations. The local lettings policy gives households with that local connection the opportunity to access affordable housing, even if the whole household, even if there is a household with a greater housing need living outside of the village. And the local lettings policy works on a cascade principle. And there's an example on the right hand side here of the cascade mechanism that's in place for our scheme at Eltersley. And as you'll see at the top here, it starts by saying that qualifying persons from the parish with a local connection shall have priority of allocation before qualifying persons from neighbouring parishes. And it then goes on to say that in the event that a qualifying person with a local connection to the parish cannot be identified, then the affordable dwelling can be offered in the following priority order. And it then works through to those showing a local connection to neighbouring parishes. And then if that clause is exhausted, it would go on to those who would qualify from the parish with a local connection, but would under-occupy the affordable dwelling by 1 bedroom. So, i.e. if it was a 2-bedroom house, but the person only qualified for a 1-bedroom house, they would fall into, but they had a local connection, they'd fall into that category. And then it goes on to those showing the local connection to the neighbouring parishes, but would under-occupy the affordable dwelling by 1 bedroom. So that's the neighbouring parishes, but not quite meeting the occupation criteria. And then the last category is anyone with a local connection to the district of South Cambridgeshire. And then the clause at the bottom says that if a person from those neighbouring parishes cannot be identified, the affordable dwelling can be offered by the owner to qualifying persons who do not have a local connection referred to above. And the reason for that is that no housing association can afford to be in a position where homes can't be allocated and let to somebody. But but that's important when you think back to the housing need work that Jenna and her team does, and the amount of homes that we then look to promote as part of that scheme. So we'll always try and make sure that we're not building more homes than what there is a local need for, and considering what that future local need might be as well. We then move on to tendering. So once we've obtained our planning permission, we'd then be looking to obtain further intrusive site investigations that might be required to assist contractors. So this is really things like intrusive site investigations, where they'll be looking in detail at the quality and type of the soil, making sure that there isn't any contamination, that it is suitable for the proposed drainage strategy, and things like that. We will then work with an employer's agent and principal designer to prepare a tender package of information to contractors, and that will include things like design criteria, timescales, and the documentation that we're going to require from those contractors, all to be specified. We would normally then submit that tender package to 3 to 5 contractors and invite them to bid to construct the homes for us. Normally contractors are given a 6 to 8 week timescale for returning of tenders, and those are then analysed upon receipt for compliance with the brief that we've given them. And at this point, we'd then undertake due diligence assessments of the contractors to make sure that they were both competent and financially viable in order to undertake development on our behalf, and we'd select a preferred contractor from the submissions that were received. Once we've been through tendering and we've got our planning permission, then we do still need to obtain funding for the development to make it viable to carry out. There are 2 main sources of external funding that Hasto uses. The first is Homes England funding, and currently we're in a 5-year affordable homes programme which provides £11.5 billion towards affordable housing, and 10% of that is allocated to homes in rural areas. So whilst the percentage is quite low, that's still a significant amount of money that Homes England provide to affordable rural housing. And there's a second form of funding that we're sometimes able to take advantage of, is local authority funding. So this is where commuted sums may be available from an under provision of affordable housing that's not being provided on another site within the same district. And our bidding for funding takes place once we've got planning permission and the contractor has been selected, so that we can demonstrate to funders that we've got a deliverable scheme. We then come on to construction, and construction begins once planning pre-commencement conditions have been discharged. Often Hasto likes to undertake a sod-turning ceremony as well in some instances, and that's what you can see on the image on the right. The employer's agent, the principal designer, and a clerk of works will then monitor the progress, safety, and quality of works during construction on our behalf. And we'll also undertake a further local event prior to advertising the homes to ensure that eligible households know how to register and bid for the homes. So whilst we have already done a consultation before we've gone into planning, we like to do a follow-up one to make sure that if anyone has been missed as part of that initial exercise, or if there's anybody that thought about it but didn't carry through to register, that they can then do that. We'll also advertise the homes to coincide with the construction works being completed, and the nominations to the properties will then take place in line with the Section 106 agreement and that local lettings policy that we talked about earlier. We then come on to completion, and this is where the works are completed and the residents move in. Within Hasto, residents are allocated a dedicated housing officer and a maintenance surveyor, and residents are provided with a home user guide and a demonstration of how to operate elements within the home. This would be things like heating, but also if there was any other particular technologies they need to be aware of. They're provided with a 24/7 telephone number in case anything goes wrong, plus access to an online portal. And often Hasto will undertake an opening ceremony in the summer following completion of the homes to celebrate the achievement. And that's a good opportunity for members of the parish council who will have been involved in that process all the way through to come along, see the completed homes and meet some of the families that have moved in. And then lastly, I'll just show you a few examples of some of the schemes that Hasto has developed in the Cambridgeshire region over the last few years with the partnership. So the first one here is Burwell in East Cambridgeshire. And then we've got Kennet, which is also in East Cambridgeshire. We then got, Horseheath in South Cambridgeshire. And lastly, Colne in Huntingdonshire. And I think what you can see from the photos as we've gone through those schemes there is it's not one particular type of property or house that Hasto looks to build. We look to try and tie in with the local vernacular, and we'll adapt our design accordingly to reflect that rather than trying to impose design on a village. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand back to Alison.
Thanks, Mike. That's great. I totally agree. I think that this wide variety of houses that you build, I think, you know, they're really attractive. And I think, you know, a lot of people sometimes when they think about affordable housing worry about what the houses might look like and whether they'll fit with their local community. And I think that clearly shows that that they do, and they're really quite attractive homes. Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's a really comprehensive walkthrough of the sort of the journey to building affordable homes, right from the bit we do up front, right through to getting the local people living in those homes. So I'd now like to introduce Alison Thompson, who's Deputy Development Director at English Rural Housing Association, and her colleague Wendy Farrell, who's Development Project Manager at English Rural. You're on mute, Alison.
My apologies, I thought I'd clicked it off. There always has to be one, and today it's me.
It's usually me, don't worry.
Yes, thank you for the welcome, Alison. English Rural joined the Cambridgeshire Rural Housing Partnership earlier this year for two reasons. Firstly, because the Cambridge Cottages Housing Society recently joined us as a subsidiary to English Rural. And secondly, the church commissioners are working with us on a pilot project in Cambridge to try and identify rural exception sites. So my colleague Wendy will talk about both of that a bit later on. So English Rural is a rural specialist housing association. We only work in small villages, and all of our homes are occupied by people who have a local connection to that village. That's very important to us, and the homes remain in the community in perpetuity. So our tenants don't have a right to buy, and our shared owners cannot staircase and buy the whole property outright. I mean, the whole purpose of English Rural is to ensure that these affordable homes will remain so in perpetuity for future generations in that rural community. Our work in rural communities is based on meaningful partnerships with parish councils, rural housing enablers, community land trusts, local authorities and landowners. We know it's important that partners are involved through the whole way of the project, and that we consult at every key stage, particularly with the parish council or community land trust on points such as the design, the mix of the scheme, the tenure, which does need to meet that need identified by the housing needs survey carried out by the rural housing enabler. And as Mike said, you know, wider community consultation is also important because these homes are going to become part of that community, and we need to ensure that people have an opportunity to make comments and feedback on at each stage. Thank you, Wendy. We are registered, as Hasto is, with Homes England, and are also a full investment partner, which means that we have access to grant funding and control our own development programme. So together with grant funding and our own borrowing and our reserves, we're able to commit to our partners that we'll be able to proceed and develop homes in their community. And I think in these times where interest rates are high, it is important that programmes continue, because the need for affordable homes will not go away, and we need to ensure that local people can have access to affordable homes. As Jenna mentioned a little earlier, rural exception sites are for affordable homes, but where there may be a funding gap, it's often possible to include 1 or 2 open market properties to cross-subsidise those affordable homes. And we've worked with quite a few parish councils on this, and what we normally do is to introduce 1 or 2 bungalows for open market sale. Often rural communities, there is another layer of homes that are needed, people looking to downsize their own home, not really meeting their current needs, and they don't want to leave the village. So whilst they're not eligible for affordable homes, they could perhaps buy 1 of these open market bungalows and downsize and stay in their community. When we introduce these this type of cross subsidy, we always market the homes locally for the first 3 months, and in every occasion the bungalows that we've had have gone to local people. So that's been something that's worked really well. We're very proud that we've got the highest ratings from the regulator for social housing for both viability and governance. Thank you, Wendy. Jenna's and Mike have perfectly covered rural exception sites, so I won't go into that any further, only to say how important it is that we bring affordable homes down this rural exception site route, because it is only that will ensure that firstly the homes can only go to people with that local connection, and secondly that they remain in the community in perpetuity. When we're allocating our homes, we always go to the parish council and ask them to verify that local connection. Obviously people are applying for the homes direct to the local authority, by the local authority to English Rural, but we do like to consult with the parish council to ensure that they're happy that the local connection that people have said they've got is right. We work with a whole range of landowners. Usually they're local farmers or a local landowner who've got a greenfield site in the community, but there are also national bodies such as the National Trust and also the church commissioners. We're on site with a scheme in Kent where we're working with a community land trust, and we're developing land that was owned by the church commissioners, and they made it available for affordable homes for local people. And this is the first community land trust in Kent to get permission, and we've worked with them the 7 years that it's taken to get to this stage. Rural housing doesn't come very quickly always, unfortunately. So subsequently the church commissioners are keen to move forward with similar developments. Thank you, Wendy. And yes, English Rural is very proud that we are the only housing association that has a member of the royal family as their patron, and we couldn't be more delighted that it's the Princess Royal. She takes a very keen and active interest in the work that we do, and not only coming to our new developments to formally open them and meet all the residents, but also she will host seminars and rural forums promoting the importance of affordable homes in small villages. And as both Jenna and Mike have said, without affordable homes, not enabling people to stay in that community where they've grown up or return and offer support to family and friends who may need that, these rural communities will not be those vibrant places that they once were. And now I'll hand over to Wendy.
Thank you, Alison. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of context. We can't work in isolation. It's very important that we work with other organisations. So we were delighted when we were approached by the Cambridgeshire Cottage Housing Society with a view to a merger. They shared the same ethos as English Rural to deliver affordable rural housing, but were struggling with an increase in the regulatory and compliance demands. The society became a subsidiary of English Rural in June, 1st of June last year, and maintains its own board, but bought 62 properties to the group, ranging from listed buildings to more modern homes. These will benefit from management by English Rural, as we have the resources and the experience to manage and maintain village homes, as well as investing in new rural exception schemes. And a stock condition survey was undertaken to inform maintenance strategy for the properties, whilst continuing with the Cambridge Cottage Housing Society's policy of disposing of older listed homes which become vacant, to reinvest that revenue into more modern, energy efficient homes. As well as working with the likes of Cambridge Cottage Housing Society, as Alison's touched on, we also work with the church commissioners. Following the success of the Community Land Trust scheme on church-owned land in Kent, we were asked by the church commissioners to work with them to identify a potential pilot scheme in Cambridgeshire. This was part of their 2021 Coming Home report. The Church of England outlined a commitment to release land holdings to support their investment objectives and their charitable aims and take a lead on providing affordable housing. Like the church, English Rural believes that building strong communities and bringing people together is why we've now formalised a partnership with the church commissioners in November last year to establish the pilot programme in Cambridgeshire, whereby English Rural will work in partnership with local communities on land owned by the church to bring forward a suitable small-scale pilot scheme. Typically, our schemes are around 6 homes. We are meeting regularly with the church commissioners to establish both the boundaries of the partnership and to identify a suitable site within Cambridgeshire. We will then look to engage with the parish council and other local stakeholders to develop the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison and Wendy. That's really interesting. I think there's a couple of points I think that stuck out for me there. The first of which was the one Alison made about how long it can take for a rural housing scheme to come to fruition. That's certainly something we feel at Cambridgeshire ACRE, where we get involved in the route right at the very start, and then it can take several years. I think sort of is the average something like 7 years, Jenna, does it take for a scheme to come forward?
Yeah,
that I think it might be, yeah. I guess the other thing is also that the fact that we're not talking about huge developments here. I think English Rural was saying your average scheme is about 6 houses, and Jenna, I think the biggest scheme I think we've ever had in Cambridgeshire was 30 something houses.
Yeah, and that's kind of an exception.
That's a real exception. I think typically, I mean, how big are the sort of average developments, would you say?
About 10-15 is probably, that's probably still sitting a little bit on the large side, but yeah, about 10.
Yeah, so we're not talking about huge developments that really change the character of a village. We're talking about small niche developments that will really fit with what's needed locally. So thank you, that's really interesting. So we've got some time now for questions. So I don't think anybody's put anything in the chat, but obviously if anybody has got any questions for any of our panelists, if you know how to raise your electronic hand, if you click on reactions at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the option to raise your hand. You can try that, or if you can't manage that, then please do take yourselves off mute and shout. And Bob, hi.
Hi, Alison. I've got a question, probably for the two housing associations, about the flexibility you've got in terms of developing these schemes. Sorry, there's a lot of feedback on there, but the question I've got is, we've got a potential site, a sympathetic landowner. Part of it could be developed by him anyway, so part of it won't be a rural exception site, but part of it could be a rural exception site at the back of it. I don't know what he wants to do about land ownership, and we're going to have some negotiations with him around that. There's some further complications because we also want to put a doctor's surgery on it as well. But there's a community support for it. So how flexible can you be in terms of land ownership, what's developed, and how one moves forward? I'm not asking you to answer the specific, but in general, is this something that one can discuss how it works?
Shall I start off with that, Alison?
Please.
Yes, hello. It is possible, as it sounds like to me that this site, maybe part of it could have been allocated in the local plan, or is going to be, yes, and part of it is outside of it. And we had a situation on a village in Kent whereby just that happened. So the developer built 15 homes that were for open market sale on the allocated part, and English Rural had 10 affordable homes on the rural exception, and the planners actually accepted it as a hybrid planning application. So we were able to, we bought the part of the land from the developer for the affordable homes, and so we own and manage those. So I think it's a good idea would be just to get some information and support from the local planning authority to see how they could see it go best. But it's certainly possible to split land ownership between a developer and a housing association.
Okay, thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Had a question in the chat from Pat Del Grazia. Where does the money come from all the initial consultations, surveys and applications before you actually get funding for the build? I don't know who'd like to pick that one up.
Don't mind picking that one up.
Thank you.
Yes, in terms of the budget, before we actually start development, that all comes from the housing association's own resources. So we don't get any external funding support towards that, which is why it's important that we make sure we do all the relevant due diligence at the appropriate stages so that we don't incur too much excessive cost and then find out something that we wish we'd known 6 months or 12 months earlier, and it's potentially abortive scheme. So yeah, the money for those initial stages all comes from the provider's own resources.
Lovely, thank you. Any further questions? Jessica, hello.
Hello, thank you. I just had a question for all of the members of the panel, if that's okay. Mine's more of a generic question, if that's okay. So if the local community want and need housing, what can we do to reduce the length of time that it takes to deliver it? So if we say it's on average 7 years, you know, what are the kind of key challenges or blockages right now, and how might we overcome those? And I'm just flagging it now because Therese Coffey, who's the Secretary of State for DEFRA, delivered a paper recently on unleashing rural opportunity and you know, reaffirmed the national government's commitment to support kind of rural housing. And I'm just thinking, you know, so what is it right now that kind of is some of our key challenges that means it takes so long to develop housing in our rural areas, and what can we do to kind of tackle that challenge?
Well, as I was the one who said 7 years, perhaps I better just caveat that particular project in Kent was with a community land trust. So there was a lot of time in spending in establishing their entity and what have you. But I mean, we have delivered local needs housing in as little as 3 years, and it's really just a matter of everything coming together perfectly, which, as we all know, doesn't always happen. But the housing needs survey is the first step, and that can be done fairly quickly. That's not a delaying factor. Finding a site, I mean, sometimes we're lucky and we've been offered 3 or 4 sites, or 3 or 4 sites have been identified, so we need to go back to landowners and see which one is most appropriate to take forward. So, oh, sorry. So if a landowner can be found quickly and an option agreement quickly, again, the delay isn't there. Another fairly significant delay at the moment is, unfortunately, in the planning process. A lot of local authorities are very suppressed in their planning departments. So sometimes an application can get held there for longer than perhaps it should do. But overall, I don't want to be doom and gloom about it. It should take ages. Yes, sometimes it does, but with strong support and will from the local community, the parish council, the local members, then it can, it can go through quite smoothly. But there are several logs in the fire, in the pan.
Thank you. Michael, Jenna, did you have anything to add to that from your experiences?
So Alison picked up about planning, and that's both resources, but also the amount of changes in policy that come out, and that's both planning policy, but building regulations as well. And we have to adapt all of the time to changes. So we might have started the scheme going through a process, but actually then a new policy comes out, and we've got to make sure that we've taken account of that. I would say the thing that I've seen where it's worked best is where there's a particularly strong and supportive member of the parish council, often the parish council chair. Those are the schemes that tend to get moving quickest, because if you've got somebody who's very, very supportive at that local level, it does help an awful lot. Sometimes we can be going back to parish council with scheme designs, and that, because there might be a little working group set up and that has to report back to the parish council, that can work, but ultimately what we need from that local level is that real drive, and that can help us then in that getting that first stage of the consultation completed before we get on to the challenge of planning permission. There are always going to be challenges. We've seen it on the construction side in the last couple of years as well, with raising of prices and shortage of materials. So there are always peaks and troughs through every stage of that process that I went through in my presentation. There are always things that we've got to be flexible about and take account of. But I think I would say a strong parish council member, often the chair, if they're very supportive of the scheme, that does help an awful lot.
Thanks, Mike. Any other questions? No? Okay. Right. If there's no questions, I guess I could start by obviously thanking all our speakers today. That's been it's been really good to hear from you, and I hope that sort of what you as an audience are taking away is some sort of better insight into sort of the journey towards building affordable homes. And I guess really it's about the whole partnership approach. You can see how Cambridgeshire ACRE works closely with our housing association partners. But us together can't do it alone. We need that partnership with parish councils really to bring those schemes forward and to really build the houses that local people need and want. We are going to follow up today's session with an email, so you'll get a link to the recording, the slides that our speakers have kindly shared, because I think they might be useful to you, and also a reminder of the offer from Cambridgeshire ACRE, that what we can bring to support you in sort of beginning to get this process underway. So obviously, if you are, if this has inspired you in any way to think that perhaps you might like to explore a rural affordable housing development further, then I would urge you to get in touch with Jenna. The first step is that she'd come out and speak to you, obviously as a community group, and give you sort of give the rest of your members, for example, a bit more of an insight into how the process works. And we're really keen to do that. There's a desperate need for affordable housing in Cambridgeshire. So the more we can do together to make that happen, then so much the better, I think. I don't think I've got anything else to say. Oh, apart from, I probably really should mention, we mentioned right at the start, this is Rural Housing Week. If you are on social media, if you use social media at all, if you search for the hashtag Rural Housing Week, what that will do is bring you up copious posts from organisations all over the country that are posting about this whole idea of rural affordable housing development. There's some really good blogs. Our team here have written some really good blogs and case studies. But as I say, if you search for that hashtag, you'll see them from all over the country, and they really are well worth a read. So please, I'd encourage you to do that. So just one final check that there's no further questions. Nobody's got anything else they want to say? No, in which case you'll get the rest of your afternoon back, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.